Power doesn't reveal who people are. It reveals who you think they are. At exactly 7:12 p.m., Richard Coleman walked into his own restaurant, and no one recognized him. The lights were low, golden, reflecting off crystal glasses and polished wood, the kind of place where a single dinner could cost more than a week's rent. He wore a simple gray jacket, nothing like the tailored suits his staff were used to seeing in board meetings, nothing that screamed billionaire owner. Tonight, he wasn't Richard Coleman, CEO of Coleman Hospitality Group. Tonight, he was just another difficult customer. And he had a plan. He took a seat near the center of the dining room, the perfect vantage point. From here, he could see everything. Every hesitation, every forced smile, every crack in professionalism. This wasn't just dinner. It was a test. His test. He believed something most people wouldn't say out loud. That people only showed their true selves when pushed. When pressure replaced comfort. When respect was no longer guaranteed. And tonight, he was going to push. The first server approached, polite but rushed. He sent his order back twice. The second time, she apologized too quickly, her voice trembling just enough to confirm what he already thought. Weak under pressure. Another staff member avoided eye contact entirely, choosing silence over engagement. Cowardice, he noted. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The discomfort he created was enough. Around him, conversations continued, forks against plates, soft laughter, the quiet rhythm of a high-end restaurant. No one noticed what was really happening. Except one person. At the far end of the room, Emily Carter stood beside a table, taking an order. Her movements were precise. Efficient. No wasted energy. She didn't rush. She didn't linger. And unlike the others, she wasn't watching him. Not yet. If you've ever seen someone stay calm when everything around them shifts, you know how rare that is. You might even want to pause and think about that for a second. Maybe even drop a comment about what you would do in her place, because most people wouldn't notice what was coming next. Richard noticed her the moment she didn't react. That alone made her different. Interesting. He leaned back slightly, fingers tapping once against the table, already planning the next move. The real test hadn't started yet. And without realizing it, he had just chosen his final subject. Richard did not call her over right away. He waited, watched, measured. That was always his way. Patterns revealed more than pressure ever could, at least in the beginning. Emily moved from table to table with a quiet rhythm that did not try to impress anyone. Her posture stayed straight but relaxed, her voice soft but clear, never too eager, never indifferent. When a customer asked for a substitution that was not on the menu, she did not apologize immediately like the others had. She paused for half a second, just enough to think, then offered an alternative that made sense, something practical, something respectful to both the kitchen and the guest. The man nodded, satisfied. No tension, no performance, just competence. Richard narrowed his eyes slightly. That was not typical. Most employees, when faced with uncertainty, either overcompensated or withdrew. She did neither. She simply stayed steady. He glanced down at the menu, though he had already memorized every item months ago. This restaurant was his flagship location, the one he personally reviewed down to the spacing between tables, the angle of the lighting, the exact temperature of the dining room, set to 71 degrees Fahrenheit for maximum comfort. Everything here was controlled. Everything except people. And people, in his experience, always broke under the right conditions. He signaled subtly, just enough for the floor manager to notice, then leaned back again, waiting. Across the room, Emily finished placing a check on a table. The couple thanked her, genuine warmth in their voices. She gave a small nod, nothing exaggerated, then turned. For a brief moment, her eyes scanned the room. Not searching, not nervous, just aware. And that was when she noticed him. Not as the owner, not as anything important, just another guest sitting alone, observing too much. Their eyes met for less than a second. She did not smile automatically like the others had. She did not look away quickly either. She simply acknowledged his presence, then continued walking. Richard felt something shift, small but undeniable. Most people reacted to him even when they did not know who he was. It was in the way they straightened, the way their tone changed, the subtle instinct to please. She had none of that. Interesting, he thought. Very interesting. A few minutes later, she approached his table, not rushed, not hesitant. Just on time. Good evening, sir. My name is Emily. I will be taking care of you tonight. Her voice carried no strain, No forced enthusiasm. Just clarity. Richard did not respond immediately. He let the silence stretch, a tactic that usually made people uncomfortable. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. Most servers would begin to fill that silence, offering specials, repeating themselves, trying to regain control of the moment. Emily did not. She stood there, composed, pen resting lightly against her notepad, eyes attentive but not intrusive. Waiting, not reacting. Richard finally looked up at her, studying her face as if searching for the flaw that had to be there. Everyone had one. "I will have the steak," he said slowly, then closed the menu halfway. "Actually, no." Surprised me. It was a vague, unreasonable request, the kind that usually created confusion. Emily tilted her head just slightly, considering. "Do you have any dietary restrictions or preferences I should be aware of?" she asked. Simple, direct, no panic, no guesswork. Richard almost smiled. The game had just begun. Emily did not write anything down right away. She held his gaze for a brief moment, not challenging, not submissive, just present, as if she was weighing something far beyond the words he had just said. "No restrictions," Richard added, watching closely, waiting for hesitation, for uncertainty, for that small crack that always appeared. It never took long, but she only nodded once, a subtle movement. "All right," she said calmly. "I will choose something that reflects the kitchen at its best tonight." No flourish, no attempt to impress, just a decision. She turned and walked toward the kitchen, her pace steady, leaving behind a silence that lingered longer than it should have. Richard leaned back slightly, fingers steepled together, replaying the exchange in his mind. Most people tried to control the situation when faced with ambiguity. They filled the space with words, with reassurance, with performance. She had done none of that. She had accepted the uncertainty and moved forward without asking for approval. That was not obedience. That was judgment. And judgment required confidence. Across the room, the floor manager approached another table, smoothing over a minor complaint with a polished smile that did not quite reach his eyes. Richard barely glanced at it. His attention had narrowed. Emily reappeared near the service station, speaking quietly with the chef, her posture unchanged. There was no urgency in her movements, but there was precision. She listened more than she spoke. When the chef responded, she nodded once, then adjusted something on the ticket before stepping back. No wasted motion. No second guessing. It was as if she trusted the outcome before it even arrived. Richard had built his entire empire on control. Data, forecasts, risk mitigation. Every decision calculated down to the smallest variable. And yet, here was someone operating in uncertainty with a level of calm he rarely saw even in his top executives. It did not make sense. A few minutes passed. The restaurant continued its quiet rhythm, but something had shifted in his perception. He was no longer observing the staff as a whole. He was studying one person. Emily approached another table, an older couple this time. The man struggled slightly with the menu, his glasses resting forgotten in his jacket pocket. Before he could ask, Emily gently pointed to a section, speaking softly, guiding without making him feel incapable. The woman smiled, grateful. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was intentional. Respect, Richard realized, was not something she turned on or off. It was something she carried. Not for show, not for reward, just consistent. When she returned to his table with a glass of water, she placed it carefully to the right, exactly where it should be, then stepped back. "Your entree will be ready shortly," she said. Again, no unnecessary words. Richard looked at her more directly now. "Do you always let strangers decide what you bring them?" he asked, his tone neutral but edged with something probing. Most would hear criticism in that question. Most would defend themselves. Emily did not. She considered it for a second. "Only when they are willing to accept the result," she replied. No hesitation. No apology. Just truth. Something in Richard's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. That was not the answer he expected. And for the first time that evening, he felt it clearly. Not control. Not superiority. Curiosity. Richard let the silence sit between them for a moment longer than necessary, studying her as if the answer she had just given might shift if he looked at it from a different angle. It did not. Emily stood exactly as she had before, balanced, attentive, but never leaning into the moment for approval. That was what unsettled him. She was not trying to win. "And what if the result is wrong?" he asked finally, his tone quieter now. less about testing and more about probing. A question layered beneath a question. Emily did not respond immediately. She glanced briefly toward the kitchen, as if checking the rhythm of something unseen, then looked back at him. Then it is still honest, she said. And honest things can be corrected. No defensiveness. No need to be right. Just clarity. Richard's jaw shifted slightly. That was not how most people thought. In his world, mistakes were weaknesses. Errors were liabilities. Everything was measured in outcomes, not intentions. But she had separated the two without hesitation. That meant she understood something most people did not. Or perhaps she valued something he had stopped valuing a long time ago. A nearby table called for attention, a sharp voice cutting through the low hum of the dining room. Another server rushed over, already apologizing before even hearing the complaint. Emily did not move toward it. It was not her table. But she noticed. Always noticing. The kind of awareness that did not demand attention but never missed anything. Richard followed her gaze for a second, then back to her. You seem very certain, he said, leaning slightly forward now. For someone who does not know what is coming out of that kitchen. It was a challenge. Subtle, but intentional. Emily met it without raising her voice, without shifting her posture. I do not need to know everything, she replied. Just enough to stand by the decision I made. The words landed softly, but they carried weight. Enough to make him pause again. This was not confidence built on ego. It was something quieter, something harder to shake. The kind of confidence that did not need to prove itself. A few moments later, a food runner approached with a plate, setting it down carefully in front of Richard. The presentation was precise. A perfectly seared steak, medium rare, accompanied by a seasonal garnish arranged with intention rather than excess. Emily stepped forward, not to explain every detail, not to perform, but simply to ensure it was placed correctly. Please let me know if anything needs adjustment, she said. Standard words, but not delivered like a script. Richard looked down at the plate, then back at her. This was the moment most people revealed themselves. Satisfaction. Doubt. The need for validation. He picked up his knife slowly, cutting into the steak with deliberate precision. The center was exactly as it should be. Warm. Controlled. Measured. He took a bite. Chewed once. Twice. His expression did not change. He placed the fork down gently. It is acceptable, he said. A neutral response. Intentionally cold. The kind that usually made people scramble to improve, to recover, to please. Emily did not react. Not even a flicker. Understood, she said simply. No follow-up. No attempt to elevate the experience. She accepted the feedback exactly as it was given. Nothing more. Nothing less. And that was new. Richard felt something unfamiliar press against his usual certainty. A slight shift in the balance he had controlled all evening. Because for the first time, his reaction had not shaped hers. And without that control, the test he had designed began to feel incomplete. Richard did not reach for his fork again. Instead, he leaned back slowly, his eyes never leaving Emily as she stepped away from the table with the same measured calm. Something had shifted, and he did not like that he could not immediately define it. Control, to him, had always been predictable. Cause and effect. Pressure and response. But she had broken that pattern without effort, and now the room felt different, even though nothing visible had changed. He glanced around briefly. Other tables continued as usual. Conversations flowed. Glasses clinked softly. The illusion of normalcy remained intact. But his focus had narrowed into something sharper, more intentional. If the earlier interactions had been observation, what came next would not be. This time, he would force a decision. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crisp envelope, placing it deliberately on the edge of the table where it could not be ignored. Inside was $500 in cash, folded neatly. Not a tip. Not yet. A tool. When Emily returned, it was not rushed. It never was. She approached with the same quiet presence, stopping at the appropriate distance, her attention fully on him without ever feeling intrusive. Is everything satisfactory so far? She asked. Her tone remained even. Professional, untouched by whatever silent game he had been playing. Richard did not answer her question. Instead, he slid the envelope slightly forward, just enough to draw her attention to it. I have a request, he said, his voice low, controlled. Something simple. Emily's eyes moved briefly to the envelope, then back to his face. She did not reach for it. That alone told him she understood what it represented. "Go ahead," she said. No curiosity, no hesitation, just readiness to listen. Richard leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice just enough to separate this moment from the rest of the room. "I want you to bring me a bottle from the private reserve," he said. "The one not listed on the menu." A pause, just long enough. "And I want you to charge me for the standard house wine." There it was. Clear. Direct. A violation of policy disguised as a harmless request. The kind of thing that tested more than skill. It tested character. Around them, nothing changed. No one was watching. No one would know. It was quiet. Contained. Easy to accept. Emily did not move. Not immediately. Her eyes rested on him. Not searching for approval. Not looking for consequences, but measuring something deeper. The silence stretched, but it did not feel uncomfortable. It felt deliberate. Thoughtful. Then, slowly, she reached forward. Not for the envelope. She pushed it back toward him with a gentle motion, precise and unmistakable. "I cannot do that," she said. No apology. No explanation. Just a boundary. Richard's expression did not change, but something inside him sharpened. "It is not a difficult request," he replied, his tone still calm, but carrying a subtle weight now. "No one gets hurt." Emily held his gaze, steady as ever. "That is not how I measure it," she said quietly. The words landed differently this time. Not defensive, not reactive, just grounded. Richard tapped the edge of the envelope once with his finger, a soft, controlled sound. $500, he said, "for something that takes less than 2 minutes." It was not just an offer. It was pressure. Refined. Intentional. The kind that usually revealed everything. Emily did not look at the money again. "Then it should be easy for you to keep it," she replied. And just like that, the test changed direction. Richard did not pull the envelope back this time. He left it where it was, resting between them like a quiet line drawn across the table. Most people, when faced with that moment, would begin to soften. Not immediately, but gradually. A glance at the money. A shift in posture. A reconsideration disguised as professionalism. Emily did none of that. She stood exactly as she had before, hands relaxed, shoulders level, her attention steady but never demanding. The kind of stillness that did not come from stubbornness, but from certainty. Richard studied her more closely now, as if searching for the pressure point he had not yet found. "You are refusing a direct request from a paying customer," he said, his voice calm but firmer now, the tone of authority beginning to surface. Around them, nothing had changed. No one was watching. No manager stepping in. No external consequence. Just the two of them, and a decision that should have been simple. "I am declining a request that is not appropriate," Emily replied. The difference in wording was subtle, but intentional. Richard leaned forward slightly, his fingers resting lightly on the table. "Do you know how many people would say yes without thinking?" he asked. It was not really a question. It was pressure, shaped like logic. Emily did not look away. "Probably a lot," she said. "That does not make it right." The air between them tightened, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that could be felt rather than seen. This was no longer just a test. It was a confrontation of principles. Richard's eyes flickered briefly, something calculating behind them. He shifted tactics. "What if I told you this was a test?" he said, watching for any reaction, any crack in her composure. "What if your answer determines whether you still have a job tomorrow?" For the first time, the stakes were spoken out loud. Clear, direct, unavoidable. This was where most people broke. Fear had a way of rewriting decisions in real time. You might even be wondering what you would do in that moment, whether you would hold your ground or adjust just enough to stay safe. And that question alone is enough to make someone pause, maybe even rethink everything they believe. But Emily did not rush to respond. She did not defend herself. She did not argue. She simply took a breath, slow and steady, as if grounding herself in something deeper than the situation in front of her. Then she spoke. "Then I would rather lose the job," she said quietly, "than keep it for the wrong reason." No raised voice. No dramatic pause. Just a sentence that settled into the space between them like it had always been there, waiting. Richard felt it immediately, not as resistance, as something else, something heavier. Because for the first time that night, the power he had been holding so comfortably began to feel unstable. He had created this moment to expose weakness. But what he was seeing did not fit into that category. And that made it dangerous. He leaned back slowly, his eyes never leaving hers, the envelope still untouched between them. "You are very certain for someone in your position," he said. It sounded almost like a warning. Emily gave a small nod, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. "No," she replied softly. "Just clear." And somehow, that made the tension even harder to break. Richard said nothing for a long moment. Not because he did not have something to say, but because, for the first time that night, he was no longer certain which response would give him control back. The restaurant continued around them, unaware that something subtle but significant had shifted at table 12. A server laughed too loudly at a joke across the room. Glasses touched. A chair scraped lightly against the floor. Normal sounds. Normal rhythm. But here, the silence held weight. Emily did not move to leave. That was unusual. Most employees, after drawing a line like that, would retreat, create distance, protect themselves from what might come next. She stayed. Not confrontational, not defiant, just present, as if she understood that walking away would say more than staying. Richard noticed that. He noticed everything now. His gaze dropped briefly, not to the envelope, but to her hands. Steady, no tension in her fingers, no restless movement. Then to her posture. Balanced, not rigid, not defensive. It was the kind of composure that did not come from training alone. It came from experience, from having already faced something harder than this. That thought lingered longer than he expected. "You have done this before," he said quietly, more observation than question. Emily's expression did not change, but something in her eyes shifted just slightly, like a door opening a fraction of an inch. "Something like this," she said. Not detailed, not dismissive, just enough to confirm without explaining. Richard leaned back again, slower this time, his mind moving through possibilities. He had reviewed hundreds of employee files before launching this location. Background checks, work history, references, patterns. Emily Carter had been unremarkable on paper. 2 years at this restaurant. Previous experience in smaller establishments. No management track. No formal leadership roles. Nothing that explained this level of clarity under pressure. And yet, here she was, responding not like someone trying to keep a job, but like someone who had already decided what mattered more than keeping it. That did not come from nowhere. Across the room, the floor manager finally noticed the stillness at Richard's table. He took a step forward, then hesitated, reading the atmosphere without understanding it. Emily caught the movement in her peripheral vision, but she did not signal for help. Another small choice. Another detail that did not fit the pattern. Richard followed her line of sight, then back to her. "You are not asking for assistance," he said. Again, not a question. Emily shook her head once. "It is not necessary," she replied. Simple. Certain. Richard's fingers tapped lightly against the table again, but this time it was not calculated. It was thought. Something he had not planned for was unfolding, and he could feel it. The test he designed was supposed to expose limits. Instead, it was revealing something else entirely. Something he did not yet understand. He glanced once more at the envelope, then back at her. "Most people would have taken that," he said. Emily nodded slightly. "I know. You did not even consider it." That was the part he could not reconcile. Not hesitation. Not conflict. Just absence of temptation. Emily's gaze softened, but not in weakness. In understanding. "That is not true," she said quietly. Richard's eyes narrowed, just a fraction. That was new. A contradiction. A crack, perhaps. "Then what stopped you?" he asked. This time, it was a real question. Not a test. Not a trap. Emily held his gaze, and for the first time, there was something deeper behind her calm. Not fear. Not pride. Something else. Something lived. "Because I have seen what happens when people say yes to things like that," she said. The words were simple, but they carried weight that did not belong to this room. Not to this table. Not to this moment alone. And suddenly, the test was no longer the only story being told. Richard did not interrupt her. He could have. In any other situation, he would have redirected the conversation, pulled it back under control, turned it into something measurable again. But this time he waited. Emily's gaze did not drift. It stayed steady, but there was something different now. Not just calm. Memory. "I used to work somewhere else," she continued, her voice still quiet, but carrying a weight that did not belong to this room. A place where things like that were normal. She glanced briefly at the envelope, then back at him. Small things at first. Adjusting a bill. Looking the other way. Doing favors because someone asked the right way. Richard said nothing. His attention sharpened, not as a test, but as someone listening for the first time without trying to control what came next. No one thought it mattered, she said. It was just part of the job. Just how things worked. A pause. Not for effect. For accuracy. Until it was not small anymore. The words settled differently now. The air shifted, subtle but undeniable. What happened? Richard asked, and this time, it was not strategy. It was curiosity, real and unfiltered. Emily held his gaze, and for a moment, the distance between server and customer disappeared. Not physically, but in meaning. The place closed, she said. Not because of one decision. Because of all of them. Her tone did not accuse. It did not dramatize. It simply stated. People lost their jobs. Not just the ones who said yes. Everyone. Richard felt something tighten in his chest, a reaction he did not expect, did not immediately understand. He had seen companies fail. Competitors collapse. Numbers on a screen. But this was different. This was cause and effect, stripped of abstraction. Human. Direct. And you? He asked. Emily gave a small, almost unnoticeable shrug. I learned, she said, that the line is never where people think it is. Silence followed. Not empty. Full. Around them, the restaurant continued as if nothing had changed, but at table 12, everything had. Richard looked down at the envelope again, then slowly reached forward and closed it, sliding it back toward himself. The gesture was small, but it carried more meaning than anything he had said all evening. Emily did not react. She did not need to. The decision had already been made. But something else lingered. Something unfinished. Richard reached into his jacket again, but this time, what he pulled out was not cash. It was a simple black card. No logo on the front. No name. Just wait. He placed it on the table between them, in the same space where the envelope had been. Do you know what this is? He asked quietly. Emily glanced at it, then back at him. No, she said. Honest. Unassuming. Richard held her gaze for a moment longer, then spoke. It means I do not need to test anyone, he said. A pause. But I did anyway. The words landed heavier than he expected, not as a confession, as a realization. And in that moment, the test he had designed revealed something he had not planned to see. Not her limits. His own. Richard did not move the card after placing it down. He let it sit there between them, quiet, unannounced, but undeniable. Emily looked at it again, this time a fraction longer, not because she recognized it, but because she understood what it represented. Not wealth. Not status. Authority. The kind that did not need to explain itself. Around them, the restaurant continued in its steady rhythm, unaware that something fundamental had just shifted at one table. The floor manager, still watching from a distance, took a cautious step closer, then stopped when Richard raised his hand slightly without looking. Not now. Emily noticed the gesture. Not the authority behind it, but the ease. The familiarity. And something in her expression changed, not in surprise, but in quiet recognition. She did not ask who he was. She did not need to. You own this place, she said softly. It was not a question. Richard met her eyes and gave a small nod. No performance. No reveal. Just truth. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The power dynamic that had defined the entire evening was now visible, but it did not feel the same. Not heavier. Not lighter. Just clearer. So this was never about the wine, Emily said. Richard exhaled slowly, almost a quiet admission. No, he replied. It was about finding out who breaks. He paused, then added, more to himself than to her, and why. Emily considered that, her gaze steady, but softer now. And did you? She asked. Richard looked down at the table, at the card, at the space where the envelope had been, then back at her. For the first time that night, there was no calculation in his expression. No, he said. I found something else. The words stayed between them, simple but final. Across the room, a glass fell gently against a plate, a small sound that echoed briefly before fading back into the hum of the evening. Life continuing, unchanged. But here, something had ended, and something else had begun. Richard reached for the check presenter, placing his card inside, without ceremony. No large tip, no dramatic gesture, just a decision made differently than before. What happens next? Emily asked, not out of fear, but clarity. Richard closed the folder and slid it toward her. Tomorrow, he said, nothing changes for you. A pause. Except one thing. Emily waited, not expecting, not assuming. I stopped testing people like this, he continued. And I start listening instead. It was not an offer, not a reward. A shift, small on the surface, significant underneath. Emily nodded once, accepting it for what it was, not more, not less. She picked up the folder, her movements the same as always. Steady, grounded. As she turned to walk away, Richard spoke again, quieter this time. Emily. She paused, looking back. You did not raise your voice once, he said. Not even when you could have. Emily held his gaze for a moment, then gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. You were already listening, she replied. And then she walked away, disappearing back into the rhythm of the restaurant, exactly where she had always been, but not unnoticed anymore. Richard remained at the table a moment longer, the room moving around him, the test he had designed now meaningless in the face of something he had not expected to find. He had come looking for weakness. Instead, he had found a standard he could not measure. And as he stood to leave, one thought stayed with him, quiet but undeniable. Some people do not change the rules. They remind you what they were supposed to be all along.